Good morning, everyone. Last week, Richard gave an excellent talk on investing in the integrated soul. Now, if you missed it, you're probably thinking to yourself, what is that? The integrated soul? Well, I would encourage you, if you did miss it, to catch up with what he said on either YouTube or Facebook, because the time that you invest in doing so will be well worth it. And talking of investment, if I was to summarise his preach with a pithy marketing slogan, I think I would say it was this: invest in yourself and invest in others. Now, that's quite not as memorable as a certain supermarket's Every Little Helps, but I do think it kind of encapsulates what we feel God has been talking to us about for the next 12 months and what he is calling us as a church family to focus on. What is that, I hear you ask? Well, the answer is discipleship. Now, please don't switch off. I know that discipleship is a word that gets bandied around in Christian circles an awful lot, but it's not something that tends to get people really excited about getting involved, or, people do not run off and start signing up for discipleship classes at the first mention of the word. And if, like me, your Sunday school days are perhaps far off in the distant past, even the thought of that word may bring back some less than joyful memories. But this morning, I want to just take the dusty old covers off this concept and to explore underneath, because I believe that actually this is something of excitement, adventure, and treasure. And so I'm going to ask you to just put aside your preconceptions this morning, put aside any unhelpful memories that you might have, and explore this topic anew with me this morning. And as I do, please just bear in mind Richard's focus last week on invest in yourself and invest in others, and see if you can pick up along the way different things where that applies. I'll be trying to point them out as we go. Now, I am fascinated by language. Much of my working life has involved working with words. So let me start by telling you something that might surprise you. Did you know that the word discipleship does not feature in the Bible? Also, in the English language, you're probably more aware of this. It is really quite an ambiguous word. People use it for all sorts of different things, and so it means all sorts of different things to different people. But what I can say is that when we look at the time of Jesus, when we look at biblical times, the concept of personal discipleship was very familiar to everybody. For the young Jewish boy, when he reached the age of 13, he would be assigned to a rabbi, a teacher of the holy words, which were in the Jewish faith is the Torah. And he would be assigned to learn all about the Torah, but not just head knowledge, not just the application of the words, but also his task would be to study the life of the rabbi and to learn from him some of the practical things that he could add into his own life to try and become like his rabbi. For the Greeks, it was very similar, except in their case, they became disciples of their philosophers. But again, it wasn't just about knowing what these people had written or had said. It was about studying their lifestyle and absorbing some of that into their own lives and trying to become like these people that they admired. So a key thing to notice about discipleship in biblical times, and indeed in our modern day, is that it's about adopting a lifestyle and practices as much as it is about having head knowledge about something. So turning our attention to Jesus, what can we learn from those who are referred to as his disciples? And by the way, we often think of Jesus as having 12 disciples, but actually the reality is that he had many more than that. In Luke 10, he tells us that Jesus sent out 72 disciples to go into the towns and villages ahead of him, and that actually the 12 were chosen from this much larger group. So that's just one of those little concepts to bear in mind. There were way more than 12 disciples. Anyway, we can quickly identify three key things that these people had in common. The first was that they spent time with Jesus. The second was that they became more like Jesus in character. And the third is that they learned how to do the things that Jesus did. So let's look at each of these things in turn, bearing in mind how there may be that connection between us investing in ourselves and our own personal spiritual journey, but also investing in others and how we can enable people to discover who Jesus is and have a relationship with him themselves. Now, please don't feel that I'm going to talk about quite a lot of practical things as we go through. Please don't feel that you have to take all of this on board and write yourself a to-do list to tick each and everything off. What I would ask is open your heart to the Holy Spirit right now and ask him to reveal to you what is the next step for you in this discipleship journey. And let me just pray before we move on. Holy Spirit, I ask that you will speak to each of us individually, that something from what I share this morning will just resonate with each and every person, and they'll be able to say, yes, that's the thing that I feel that God is calling me to focus on in this next season. So speak to us today, we ask. Amen. So there are many ways in which spending time with Jesus is really good for us. Personally, I find that when I slow down and stop focusing on the busyness of the day, stop focusing on my to-do list and all that I've got to do, and instead set aside time to just be with Jesus, I just find that worry and stress disappear. I begin to find peace. I'm reminded of who I am as a loved daughter of the King. I'm reminded of who Jesus is, the person who has conquered death, the person who has paid the price for all my wrongdoing, the person that I will spend eternity with. I'm reminded of how wonderful and powerful he is. And that it's so good for me to do that. And I want to encourage you to do it as well, because you'll find it's really good for you too. Spending time with Jesus also creates an opportunity for us to learn directly from him. I encountered an amazing verse this week. I love it when the Bible surprises me. I've been a Christian for quite a long time now, and I really love it when I still come across things where I haven't noticed before. And the verse was this, Isaiah 54, verse 13. Your children will be taught by the Lord, and great will be your peace. Isn't that a wonderful verse? Especially if you're a parent or a carer this morning. Your children will be taught by the Lord, and great will be your peace. What an amazing promise to hold on to. You know, there are many stories of people who encounter Jesus before they even know who he is. They have visions and dreams of him. I have a friend who I worked with a number of years ago she grew up as a Muslim in a Muslim family, and she was going through a really rough time, and she had a dream of a man dressed in white, and she didn't know who it was. She didn't know the significance of the dream. She just woke up and was like, that was really, really weird. Anyway, a few days later, she was in London, had some time to kill, and she saw people going in and out of a building, and she thought, oh, well, maybe that's a museum, the way they're just wandering in and out. I need somewhere to just sit quietly. I'm going to go in there. So in she went, and as she walked through the door, on the wall in front of her was a painting, and the face in the painting was the face of the man from her dream. So she grabbed hold of somebody and she said, please tell me who that is in the painting. And the person said, oh, well, that's an image of Jesus. At which point my friend was completely blown away and was like, I need to know who this Jesus is. And unsurprisingly, soon after that, she became a Christian. So she can encounter Jesus before she even knew him through a dream. How much more than we who have already committed to following Jesus have daily encounters with him. We can enter into his presence, sit at his feet just as the disciples did when he was walking on the earth, and learn from him. I don't know about you, but my go-to place is the internet. If I want to know anything, I'm straight onto Google and typing in my words into the search engine. And, you know, there is a lot of really good stuff on the internet. And so I'm not, discouraging you from doing that at all. I would encourage you to be wise, because there's also a lot of complete rubbish on the internet. So do just check things out before you start taking them on board. But the internet is great. One of the things I really like about the internet that I didn't have when I was a young Christian is the fact that you can go online and you can find the teachings of some really great Bible scholars. One of my favourites is Andrew Wilson, who is particularly connected with our family of churches. And I have been known to say that I would sit and listen to Andrew reading his shopping list because he is so inspiring. So do look him up. Another person is Tim Keller, who I think his teaching on prayer is particularly outstanding. You can also go and find the teachings of people who are no longer with us. You may have heard of C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Narnia children's books. He has some phenomenal books on the Christian faith out there, on everything from grief to, well, just all sorts of things. Look him up. And somebody else to check out is Charles Spurgeon, who is known as the greatest preacher there ever was. Go and read some of his stuff, see if you agree. But how often, though, do we actually think of going direct to Jesus and asking for that revelation from him? If you've never done that, I would encourage you to try out our morning meditations. They run on Facebook 8 a.m. Monday to Friday, and they're a great way to, together with other people, just focus on a few short verses from one of the Psalms and to just ask God to speak to you through them. And also you hear what God is saying to other people. I find them really, really encouraging every morning. And so if you've never done that, it's a good place to start. Just log on, 8 o'clock every weekday. Now, it's also important to understand that a fundamental part of following Jesus, of being his disciple, is the call to worship him exclusively. You know, a lot of people are quite cool with Jesus, at least they're pretty cool with their idea of who he is. They would quite happily agree that he taught some really great stuff. Love your neighbour as yourself. Care for those in need. Don't judge others so that you won't be judged. It's all great stuff. And some people might take it a bit further and not only agree with what he said, but actually try to adopt some of what he did into their lives because it's good stuff to do. However, that does not make us true disciples of Jesus. A true disciple makes a heart commitment to him and becomes a worshipper. When a Samaritan woman met Jesus, which you can read about in chapter 4 of John's Gospel, she met him at a well where she went to get water. The conversation went something like this. It began with Jesus giving her one or two hints about who he was. The conversation then went on to him actually revealing who he was in a very practical way, because he started to tell her all about the life that she was living, and that really astonished her. How could this man know who she was? Who was he that he could do that? And then the conversation moves on to the subject of worship. And Jesus says this to her, "A time is coming and has now come when the true worshippers will worship the Father in the Spirit and the truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks." And this is where we see a divergence from the kind of discipleship that we see in biblical times with the Jewish boy and his rabbi teacher, the Greek student and his philosopher, into something that's much more, because they were not called to worship their teachers. But there is a call on us to worship Jesus, because Jesus is God, and he is worthy of all our praise, worthy of all our honour and our love and our devotion. Worship is a fundamental part of discipleship. And also, when we truly love someone, we just want to spend time with them. And when we spend time with Jesus, we can't help but fall in love with him again because he's so amazing. So this morning, a little challenge for you. If you're feeling that actually your heart's grown a little cool towards Jesus and perhaps you're not bothering to spend the time with him that you used to, I would encourage you to start doing so again, to just give yourself that opportunity to fall in love with him all over again, because he is so amazing. Now, when it comes to investing in other people who perhaps don't know Jesus yet, how do we go about doing that? It's a bit of a challenge. I came across a list of things that Jesus did with his disciples, and one of them was that he connected them to God and he connected them to one another. So one of my questions this morning is, how do we connect people who don't know Jesus to God, to Jesus, and how do we connect them with other people who do already know Jesus? I think perhaps one of the simplest ways of doing that is to share stories. Earlier this week, I was on a call with Den Martin, who leads the church in Toaster, and he was saying how he'd been out fishing, which he does a lot, and he'd come across two boys on the bank who were also fishing, got chatting with them, and he started to tell them his story of how he'd been healed. A while back, Den was seriously ill and told that he didn't have very long to live, and then he was miraculously healed. He has paperwork to prove it. But as he started telling the boys this story, they said to him, "Oh, hold on a minute. Now, we've heard this story before. Somebody else was down here telling us about this man who had been healed supernaturally. And it's you, isn't it? You're the guy from the church up the road." And Den absolutely loved that because it gave him such an in. These boys were actually really excited to have met the man who had been healed. And they wanted to know more about how that had happened. And Den, of course, was really excited to point them to the person that had healed him, to point them to Jesus. So tell your stories, our personal stories. I really believe are like treasure that we're given to just give away, scatter it to everyone. And I can guarantee that you have a story to tell. In fact, you probably have lots of stories, and every story you have will impact somebody's lives. God has given you stories for specific people. And it doesn't matter that it's not the amazing story of being healed from a terminal illness. Your stories are valuable treasure to use to share the good news of Jesus. Another thing that Jesus did with his disciples was he shared new truth with them, things that they had no idea about. And you know what? People these days, a lot of people, they have no idea about what the Christian faith is about or who Jesus is or what he did. And so again, we have lots of opportunities to just share the truth with people. Many years ago, when I was a university student, I was travelling around Ireland with a couple of friends, and we spent the night in a particular B&B where the owner's young lad, he was about 10 years old, was clearly really bored, so he came down to chat with us. And my friend said to him, "Would you like me to tell you a story?" At which point he was like, yeah, of course. Remember, this was in the days before the internet, so, he really had nothing better to do. But anyway, he sat there and my friend told him the story of the feeding of the 5,000 and particularly emphasised the fact that it was a young lad of about 10 years age who gave up his lunch in order for Jesus to do the miracle. And this lad was so excited. He'd never heard the story before. He had no idea that the Bible was relevant to somebody like him. He didn't know that Jesus would use something from a 10-year-old boy to do the most amazing miracle, and he wanted to know more. It was just a simple step introducing him to Jesus and how wonderful Jesus is. So why not ask God this week to give you an opportunity to share a story with someone, either from your own experience or something from the Bible? And don't forget that you can use social media to do that this week. I came across a really fascinating article on how crowds and cancel culture, if you're not familiar with that, look it up. But crowds and cancel culture had an impact in Jesus's time as much as they do in 2020. And so I just popped it up on my Facebook and trusted that some people would read it, and for some people that it would point them to a new truth, particularly as the whole article was based around the time when Jesus was on trial. So, throw your stories out there, let God use them. The second thing we can observe about the disciples is that they became more like Jesus. Now, let me ask you a question. If you knew that today was your last day on earth, what would you do with it? I've read the story of Jesus' last evening with his disciples many, many times, but it was only recently that somebody pointed out to me that he took some of that valuable time on his last evening to wash the feet of his disciples, to serve them in that way. So what can we learn from him and what he did at that time? Well, first, that Jesus considered it really important to emphasise the importance in our lives of his service to us. Because when Peter, who was one of his disciples, objected to Jesus washing his feet, Jesus didn't pull any punches with his answer. He replied this: "If I do not wash you, you have no share with me." That's pretty hard-hitting. As followers of Jesus, it's imperative that we accept our need for Jesus to wash us clean. The whole point of him going to the cross was to bring that about. His death, the life that he sacrificed for us, was to enable us to be washed clean so that we could enter into the Father's presence wearing his righteousness. So I do encourage you to just take that on. If you haven't made that decision to follow Jesus, do look into what that means for your life. The second thing is that Jesus calls us to adopt a servant-hearted lifestyle. In John 13, verses 14 to 15, he says, "If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example. You should also, if I have done this to you, you should also do it to others." So to put this into other words, investing in others through service is another core part of being a disciple of Jesus. He then goes on to say in verses 34 and 35 of John 13, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. And by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples." Seeing the love of Christians for one another had a huge impact on me when I was a teenager, before I knew Jesus. I started going along to a local church for various reasons, but if I'm totally honest, the key attraction was the fact that there were teenage boys in the congregation, and also that my mother didn't object too much to me going to a church youth group, as she would if I'd been trying to go to a youth group elsewhere in town. But once I was there, I recognised that these people had a love that I hadn't encountered before. It was really something special, and I wanted to know why they had that, where had it come from, and also how could I have it? And of course the answer was, it was because they knew Jesus. And it didn't take me long to decide that actually I wanted to be a follower of Jesus, because I wanted that love. I wanted to experience it, and I wanted to have it to pass it on. A really simple prayer for each day is this: Lord, show me who needs to see your love today, who needs to encounter your love, and show me how I can reveal your love to them. So the third thing that we can observe from the disciples is that they learned how to do the things that Jesus did. They watched him do miracles. They watched him preach the good news. And having watched and learned, Jesus sent them out to do these things on their own. In Luke 10, as I've already mentioned, he sent out 72 disciples to go to the villages and the towns that he was planning to visit. And he said to them, "Go and heal the sick and tell these people that the kingdom of God is near." And just as he sent them out in that time, so he's sending us out today. But also, really good news, we are called to do greater things than Jesus. John 14, verses 12 to 14 says, "Very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works that I have been doing, but they will also do greater things than these." Isn't that amazing that we could do greater things than Jesus? That we are called to. He's commanded us to do it. So let's invest in ourselves so that we can do that. I'd encourage you to find a mentor. Whatever it is that you want to increase your gifting in, maybe it's the prophetic, maybe it's prayer, maybe it is going out on the streets, maybe it is doing miracles. Find somebody who is a bit further on the journey than you and ask them to come alongside you to help you. Spend time with them, watch what they do, learn how to do it through them. Ask them to pray for you so that they impart what they have into you. And a really good way, if you want to explore the supernatural side of being a disciple of Jesus, is to sign up for our School of Supernatural Life, which will be running very soon. You can sign up today. It's a 9-month course, and I guarantee you will be on the most amazing adventure if you become a student of the School of Supernatural Life. Check out their website. Talk to Dave Ironton. Do sign up if you want to just really change your life this year. And finally, let's be people who do encourage one another to do the things that Jesus did. I remember when I was still a fairly young Christian, I'd heard about the prophetic. I was interested in the prophetic, but I was also quite scared of taking that first step, even though I was beginning to sense that I thought God spoke to me. And a friend came alongside me and really encouraged me to go for it. She was very prophetic herself. And so every time she started praying for me, she'd call me over and say, Sharon, pray for this person and give them a prophetic word. And it was huge fun. And God really delivered. And I grew a lot from watching her and from her encouragement. But also importantly, there was a point at which it all went a bit pear-shaped for me through no fault of my own, but it did go a bit pear-shaped. And she was right there. She picked me up, dusted me off, put me on my feet again, and was like, don't give up, keep going, don't be discouraged. I would not have the prophetic gifting that I've got now if it wasn't for her. So I would encourage all of us to be like her, pass on what we know, encourage others in their gifting. Pick people up when it goes a bit wrong. When the enemy tries to attack and bring people down, pick them up and set them off again. So, as I draw to an end this evening, here's just that reminder that this is a key part of God's will for us over the coming 12 months, to invest in our own personal spiritual growth, and to invest in others to help them to grow. It's a core part of discipleship, and it will open the door to treasure and adventure. On a practical level, let's commit to spending time with Jesus and to exclusively worshipping him. Let's also become more like him in terms of being servant-hearted, serving one another, serving other people. And also let's remember that we are called to be disciples who make disciples. So let's invest in others in response to those words of Jesus, to go and make disciples and to teach them all that we know of him. Have an amazing week. Have some great adventures. Let me know what you get up to with Jesus this week. Bye for now.
Hey YouTube, thanks so much for checking us out today. Here are 3 ways you can take a next step with us.
1, find out more about who Jesus is.
2, connecting with our community online.
And 3, help continue our mission by supporting us through giving. All you need to do is click on the link in the description.
We hope you're enjoying all our content, and if you want more, hit that subscribe button.